Hi everyone, and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." From the former Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius. A brief review of the last part where we discussed the topics: some winning positions in the middle game, relative value of the pieces, general strategy of the opening, and control of the center with illustrations given by Capablanca. So now, moving further into the book, Capablanca continues the discussion on control of the center. He writes, example 19, e4, e5, knight f3, d6, d4, and bishop g4. A bad move which violates one of the principles set down, according to which at least one knight should be developed before the bishops are brought out, and also because it exchanges a bishop for a knight, which in the opening is generally barred unless there is some compensation. D takes on e5 and bishop takes on f3. D takes on e5 instead loses a pawn. So bishop takes on f3, queen takes on f3, d takes on e5, bishop c4, and queen f6. If knight f6, queen b3 wins a pawn. So queen f6, queen b3, b6, knight c3, and c6 to prevent knight d5. Black, however, has no pieces out except their queen, and white, with a bishop and a knight already developed, has a chance of obtaining an advantage quickly by playing knight d5 anywhere. The student is left to work out the many variations arising from this position. These examples will show the practical application of the principles previously enunciated. The student is warned against playing pawns in preference to pieces at the beginning of the game, especially h3, h6, and a3, a6, which are moves very commonly indulged in by beginners. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 8, traps. He writes, I shall now give a few positions of traps to be avoided in the openings and in which practice has shown beginners are often caught. Example 20, d takes on e5 and knight takes on e5. Black should have recaptured with the pawn. So knight takes on e5, knight takes on e5, bishop takes d1, bishop takes f7 check, king e7, and knight d5 mate. Example 21, black having the move should play e6. But suppose they play knight f6 instead. Then comes bishop takes on f7 check. Knight e5 would also give white the advantage, the threat being, of course, bishop takes d1 and bishop takes f7 mate. Nor does bishop h5 here help matters because of queen takes on h5. Bishop e6 leaves black with the inferior position. But white's move in the text, bishop takes on f7 check, secures an immediate material advantage, and the beginner at any rate should never miss such an opportunity for the sake of a speculative advantage in position. King takes on f7, knight e5 check. King moves, for example, king g8. Knight takes on g4. And white has won a pawn besides having a better position. There are a good many other traps. In fact, there is a book written on traps on the chessboard. But the type given here is the most common of all. Capablanca concludes chapter 1 here and moves on to chapter 2, further principles in endgame play. He writes, "We shall now go back to the endings in search of a few more principles, then again to the middle game, and finally to the openings once more, so that the advance may not only be gradual but homogeneous. In this way, the foundation on which we expect to build the structure will be firm and solid." Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 9, a cardinal principle. He writes, "In the position on board, white can draw by playing b4, according to the general rule that governs such cases, that is to advance the pawn that is free from opposition. But suppose that white, either because they do not know this principle or because they do not, in this case, sufficiently appreciate the value of its application. Suppose we say white plays a4. Then black can win by playing a5, applying one of the cardinal principles of the high strategy of chess, a unit that holds 2. In this case, one pawn would hold 2 of the opponent's pawns. The student cannot lay too much stress on this principle. It can be applied in many ways, and it constitutes one of the principal weapons in the hands of a master. Apparently, white in the current position can still hold to a draw after king g3. I mention this only for the sake of clarity for the viewer, and in no way should this diminish the importance of the principle given here, since this principle of one unit holding 2 can be applied to good effect in many ways in chess, just as Capablanca states in this example. Capablanca continues. Example 22. The example given should be sufficient proof. We give a few more moves of the main variation. a4, a5, king g2, and king f4, best, cy, b4, a takes on b4, best, a5, b3, a6, b2, a7, b1 queen, a8 queen, queen e4 check, queen takes on e4 check, and king takes on e4. This brings the game to a position which is won by black, and which constitutes one of the classical endings of king and pawns. I shall try to explain the guiding idea of it to those not familiar with it. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 10, a classical ending. He writes, Example 23. In the position on board, white's best line of defense consists in keeping their pawn where it stands on h2. As soon as the pawn is advanced, it becomes easier for black to win. On the other hand, black's plan to win, supposing that white does not advance their pawn, may be divided into three parts. The first part will be for black to get their king to h3, at the same time keeping intact the position of their pawns. This is all important since in order to win the game, it is essential at the end black may be able to advance their rearmost pawn 1 or 2 squares according to the position of the white king. King g3, king e3, and king g2. If king g4, king f2, h4, and g6 will win for black. So king g2, king f4, king f2, king g4, king g2, king h4, king g1, and king h3. The first part has been completed. The second part will be short and will consist in advancing the h pawn up to the king. King h1, h5, king g1, and h4. This ends the second part. The third part will consist in timing the advance of the g pawn so as to play g3 when the white king is at h1. It now becomes evident how necessary it is to be able to move the g pawn either 1 or 2 squares according to the position of the white king, as indicated previously. In this case, as it is white's move, the pawn will be advanced 2 squares, since the white king will be in the corner. But if it were black's move, the g pawn should only be advanced 1 square, since the white king is at g1. King h1, g5, king g1, g4, king h1, g3, h takes on g3. If instead king g1, then g2. So h takes on g3, h takes on g3, king g1, g2, king f2, king h2, and wins. It is in this analytical way that the student should try to learn. They will thus train their mind to follow a logical sequence in reasoning out any position. This example is excellent training since it is easy to divide it into 3 stages and to explain the main point of each part. The next subject we shall study is the simple opposition. But before we devote our time to it, I wish to call attention to 2 things. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 11, obtaining a passed pawn. He writes, when 3 or more pawns are opposed to each other in some such position as the one on board, there is always a chance for one side or the other of obtaining a passed pawn. Example 24. In the position on board, the way of obtaining a passed pawn is to advance the center pawn b6 and a takes on b6. If instead c takes on b6, a6. So a takes on b6, c6, b takes on c6, a6. And as in this case the white pawn is nearer to queen than any of the black pawns, white will win. Now, if it had been black's move, black could play b6, c takes on b6, and c takes on b6. It would not be advisable to try to obtain a passed pawn, because the white pawns would be nearer to queen than the single black pawn. A takes on b6, a takes on b6, and the game properly played would be a draw. The students should work this out for themselves. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 12, how to find out which pawn will be first to queen. He writes, when two pawns are free or will be free to advance to queen, you can find out by counting which pawn will be the first to succeed. Example 25. In the position on board, whoever moves first wins. The first thing is to find out by counting whether the opposing king can be in time to stop the passed pawn from queening. When, as in this case, it cannot be done, the point is to count which pawn comes in first. In this case, the time is the same, but the pawn that reaches the 8th square first and becomes a queen is in a position to capture the adversary's queen when they make one. Thus, a4, h5, a5, h4, b6, and a takes on b6. Now comes a little calculation. White can capture the pawn, but if they do so, they will not, when queening, command the square where black will also queen their pawn. Therefore, instead of taking, white plays a6, h3, a7, h2, and a8 queen and wins. The student will do well to acquaint themselves with various simple endings of this sort, so as to acquire the habit of counting, and thus be able to know with ease when they can or cannot get there first. Once again, I must call attention to the fact that a book cannot by itself teach how to play. It can only serve as a guide, and the rest must be learned by experience. And if a teacher can be hard at the same time, so much the faster will the student be able to learn. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 13, the opposition. He writes, when kings have to be moved and one player can, by force, bring their king into a position similar to the one shown in the position on board, so that their adversary is forced to move and make way for them, the player obtaining that advantage is said to have the opposition. Example 26. Suppose in the position on board, white plays king d4. Now black has the option of either opposing the passage of the white king by playing king d6, or if they prefer, black can pass with their own king by replying king f5. Notice that the kings are directly opposed to each other, and the number of intervening squares between them is odd, 1 in this case. The opposition can take the form shown here, which can be called actual or close frontal opposition, or this form, which can be called actual or close diagonal opposition, or again this form, which can be called actual or close lateral opposition. In practice, they are all one and the same. The kings are always on squares of the same color. There is only one intervening square between the kings, and the player who has moved last has the opposition. Now, if the student will take the trouble of moving each king backwards as in a game, in the same frontal, diagonal or lateral line respectively just shown in the positions, we shall have what may be called distant, frontal, diagonal and lateral opposition respectively. The matter of the opposition is highly important and takes at times somewhat complicated forms, all of which can be solved mathematically. But for the present, the student should only consider the most simple forms. An examination of some of the examples of king and pawn endings already given will show several cases of close opposition. In all simple forms of opposition, when kings are on the same line and the number of intervening squares between them is even, the player who has the move has the opposition. Example 27. The position on board shows to advantage the enormous value of the opposition. The position is very simple. Very little is left on the board, and the position to a beginner probably looks absolutely even. It is not the case, however. Whoever has the move wins. Notice that the kings are directly in front of one another, and the number of intervening squares is even. Now, as to the procedure to win such a position. The proper way to begin is to move straight up. Thus, King e2, King e7, King e3, King e6, King e4, and King f6. Now white can exercise the option of either playing King d5 and thus passing with their king, or of playing King f4 and prevent the black king from passing, thereby keeping the opposition. Mere counting will show that the former course, that is King d5, will only lead to a draw. Therefore, white takes the latter course and plays King f4 and King g6. If instead King e6, King g5 will win. So King g6, King e5, and King g7. Now by counting, it will be seen that white wins by capturing black's b-pawn. The process has been comparatively simple in the variation given here, but black has other lines of defense more difficult to overcome. Let us begin anew. King e2 and King d8. Now if King d3, King d7, or if King e3, King e7, and black obtains the opposition in both cases, when kings are directly in front of one another and the number of intervening squares between the kings is odd, the player who has moved last has the opposition. Now, in order to win, the white king must advance. There is only one other square where he can go, f3, and that is the right place. Therefore, it is seen that in such cases, when the opponent makes a so-called waiting move, you must advance, leaving a rank or file free between the kings. Therefore, we have King f3 and King e7. Now it would be bad to advance, because then black, by bringing up their king in front of your king, would obtain the opposition. It is white's turn to play a similar move to black's first move, that is King e3. which brings the position back to the first variation shown. The student would do well to familiarize themselves with the handling of the king in all examples of opposition. It often means the winning or losing of a game. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. One new supporter, Common Elk. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.